Coming up next on Conversations, Robert V. Taylor. He's the former dean of Seattle's St. Mark's Cathedral, the first openly gay Episcopal dean in the United States. In his book, A New Way to Be Human, he urges people to engage with the world in a different way.
There's another way to think about being human, a new way that is much more engaged, that honors both your life, your magnificence, but also the fact that the world desperately needs your participation.
Taylor also talks candidly about being gay and holding a prominent post in the Episcopal Church.
An awful lot of media hoopla about it, and some powerful forces denouncing my election.
His early life fighting apartheid in his home country of South Africa.
I'd met too many extraordinary people and seen too much of the horrors of apartheid to really ever seriously consider shutting up.
And about his mentor, hero, and friend, Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
My experience is that most people never forget meeting him.
Robert V. Taylor, next on Conversations.
Local production and broadcast of Conversations at KCTS 9 is made possible in part by KCTS 9 members, and by a major grant from the Floyd and Dolores Jones Foundation, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Robert V. Taylor, welcome to Conversations. Good to have you here.
It's great to be with you, Enrique. Thank you.
Yeah. You know, it's been, I guess, about 10 years now that I had a wonderful opportunity to talk to your mentor, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And actually, in the first part of that conversation, immediately your name came up because of the fact that, you know, it was Seattle. You were still dean at St. Mark's then. But he seemed to get this smile on his face when he talked about you because, in many ways, you were his protege. You were the guy that you had a very great relationship.
Well, and we still do, and it's one that I just, you know, it's lovely to hear you tell that story, and it makes me smile to hear it. And I love it when, you know, we've been in some public settings and he talks about how we first met, and there's a real kind of sweetness and tenderness about it that just always strikes me as fresh and new every time. And I think, you know, as you remember that encounter from 10 or so years ago, you know, my experience is that most people never forget meeting him. There's an aura about him. Right. There's a groundedness, and he connects with people
he
deeply.
Really does.
Yeah. And you know, in the book, I tell a story in each of the pathways as an intro to the pathway, and one of the pathways is about connecting stories, and I tell about my first personal one-on-one meeting with Tutu, and this, you know, confounding question that he asked me. I mean, I was this 22-year-old kid, and he was this 49-year-old, you know, iconic anti-apartheid activist, and he said to me, "So Robert, tell me who you are. Not what you do, but who you are." And I just felt a moment of pen. No one had ever asked me that question before. And, you know, we know how often you're at a party or in a coffee shop and you meet someone, and one of the first things out of their mouth is, "So what do you do?" And the question of who are you, I think, connects directly with that experience that you had with Tutu, that he wants on some level, even in a brief encounter, to know something about your essence.
He does. I have to say that. I mean, before we started taping, he wanted to know who I was, where I was from. Yeah. And also, I felt very honored being able to have him ask me these questions. Let's step back a minute.
Yeah.
You were born and raised in South Africa.
I was, yes.
How did you meet the Archbishop?
Well, our first meeting actually was in the late 70s. I had begun to be involved in the anti-apartheid movement. I had led a nationally covered protest march when Steve Biko was murdered by the government in '77. And I started to look at a lot of the activists, and I noticed that many of them seemed to have a sort of a flagging energy. that the work was demanding, and that there was not much joy in their lives, which seemed to be in such contrast to, what I'd seen publicly about Tutu. And so I took myself off to a week-long retreat in the mountains of the country and kingdom of Lesotho, which is surrounded by South Africa. And, there were, I think, 5 or 6 monks in these little tin, huts, and you had to heat water by putting, logs on a fire. And the only time we ate meat was the last night when they killed one of the chickens and had a feast, essentially. But there was a group of nuns right next door to them. And I remember one day hearing this joyful singing, and it wasn't just the voices of the nuns. There was clearly a male voice. And I looked over the wall, and there was Tutu singing and dancing with the nuns. and I had gone on that retreat to really spend some time thinking about just how to be grounded as a person and in the work of opposing apartheid and just in life. And it was a singular image for me to see this iconic person who was so hated by the government and vilified in every possible way. There he was singing and dancing, and I think it's part of why in this new book I talk about one of the pathways being about cultivating and grounding our lives in delight, because it really shifts how we approach the world.
Let's talk about the book and how you came about writing this. And as much as there is, I guess, your thoughts and observations and the spiritual part of it, there's a lot of you in this and your story, which is very fascinating, which obviously...
Well, thank you.
Well, it is, because of where you came from and how you ended up here, but also just that journey, I take it, that you've had in life. First, talk about the book and the idea of what you wanted to say here.
The book really came out of decades of working with people, and thank you for what you said about it. The sharing of parts of my story in it are done by way of invitation to the reader to say, there are stories that have shaped your life and your journey and the arc of who you are, and in those stories you discover some profound wisdom and even spiritual truths about yourself, about the universe, and the sacred. And so the book is by way of an invitation to the reader to be present to all of that. We're doing an LA book launch event on May the 16th, and in fact Desmond Tutu is going to be there for it and will participate in it, and it's at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And, I've written the book really in response to the sort of the jadedness and a sense of helplessness that many people feel about their participation in the world. That's just the way things are. What I do doesn't make a difference. And so there's this sense of resignation. And the book essentially says there is another way. There's another way to think about being human, a new way that is much more engaged, that honors both your life, your magnificence, but also the fact that the world desperately needs your participation. And so for the LA event, they posted on their website a few weeks ago a description of it, and the headline was, "How to be happy, change the world, and become fully alive." And at first I thought, really? Is that what the book's about? That kind of made me feel a little uncomfortable.
Right. Can I really do this? Yeah.
And then I thought, actually somebody has read the book and has understood it, because the book is about, and an invitation about how to be happy. Not happy in the sense that, if I go out and buy a Prius or a Mini Cooper or something, that's going to make me happy, or that, scoop of ice cream in the evening that I'm going to treat myself to. Not that sort of level of happiness, but the happiness that comes when you care about and are intentional about your own well-being as a human being. Because when you or I are intentional about our own well-being, we invariably care about the well-being of other people. And that leads us, in some small way, to help change and polish the world. So I think that Lackmer was right in how they described the book. It is about how to be happy and change the world, but not in the way that I first perceived it from reading that.
Well, how have you been able to find happiness and what you want out of life? Because you've faced some tough things in South Africa, speaking out against apartheid at the time that you were there was a dangerous thing to do, especially since you're a white South African.
Yeah.
The fact that you were gay, and also the fact that I think at some point, didn't they want to put you in the military?
Yes, yes. You know, Enrique, I tell stories about those things in the book because I believe that it is in places of difficulty, in moments of disillusionment, and on the sort of edge of our lives, those places where sometimes we don't want to go because they might be a little scary, they might unsettle the rhythm of our life as we know it, they might invite us into perhaps a little more courage than we feel that we have at that moment. But I believe it is in all of those experiences that we each have in the course of life, and the kind of hairpin curves that are thrown our way, the kind of risky invitations that life presents to us, that when we choose to accept them and enter into them, we discover a profound sense of transformation. And I'm not talking about the kind of earth-shattering transformation, but the transformation that shifts in some way your sense of comfort with yourself, your place of being in the world, the uniqueness of your own belovedness as a human being. And so those moments of difficulty, of challenge, of riskiness, I believe are always places where some of the things that we have held on to as cherished beliefs are often doubted. And I think that doubt is one of the great birth givers in our life. So in all of those ways, my experience and that of thousands of people that I've worked with is that that's where those aha moments come, and you suddenly realize, boy, I'm actually living in a way that is a little more alive than before. And with each of those steps, you then have courage to step into the next opportunity or invitation that will inevitably present itself to you or to me.
What kind of danger were you in when you were speaking out against apartheid as a young man in South Africa?
Well, you know, South Africa in the 70s was a fearful and violent place with a government that was paranoid. The only way that they could keep control and power was through the exertion of force. So anybody who challenged the system was fair game for the secret police. I was certainly followed by them. The place that I lived in when I was in college was raided by them. And the presenting issue that finally had me leave the country was my refusal to serve in the military for 2 years. And I actually went and requested a one-on-one meeting with Tutu, with whom I'd never had that personal encounter, because I wanted his blessing and his spiritual guidance for the decision I'd made to go to prison for what was billed as the rest of your life.
Were you already in a pastor?
No, I was 22 years old. I'd finished college. I'd worked for a year. I'd gotten deferments. And I was supposed to ultimately go on to seminary, so I was in that process. And Tutu basically said to me, "You're not going to prison." He said, "This is not the time." He said, "I want you to go home. We have a friend in the American consulate or embassy in Cape Town, and get your academic transcripts to him. We will find somewhere in Britain or in the United States for you to go within the next 10 days, because that's the window we had." Wow. And literally 9 or 10 days later, I was on a plane. Really a remarkable experience. And then in the United States, in the first summer, I was actually had people associated with the South African mission to the UN come and listen to me speak about apartheid and advise me that if I knew what was good for me and my family and friends, that I would stop spreading untruths about South Africa.
So was your family in danger?
My family's home was watched, their phone was tapped, mail was intercepted. A friend of mine who visited me in 1981 was detained when he went back. and interrogated for hours, wanting to know who my friends were, why I was saying what I was saying. It was clearly intended to send a message. I mean, that was the way they functioned, and the treatment that I received was mild compared to what many people received, and of course to the people who lost their lives.
Did you ever consider shutting up?
That's a great question. I didn't know how I could, because of what I'd experienced in the lives of people in South Africa who were so courageous and so filled with a vision, grounded in compassion and love, and this peaceful, the sense of a peaceful resolution being possible, even when all of the odds seemed stacked against that. And I'd met too many extraordinary people and seen too much of the horrors of apartheid to really ever seriously consider shutting up.
You eventually became a dean and came to Seattle, became the dean at St. Mark's. You became the first openly gay dean in the United States Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
The challenges of that and still being a man of the cloth.
Well, it was an interesting time. There was, as you remember, an awful lot of media hoopla about it, and some powerful forces denouncing my election. I think the reality is that I wasn't elected because I was gay. I was elected because I fitted with the vision that the institution had at the time of where it wanted to move. And there were obviously people who could not deal with that part of my identity. And I remember shortly after being elected, one of the media interviews was from a young reporter who came with a predetermined answer. He wanted to know that, from me, that the spirituality of LGBT folks was better and deeper and more profound than the spirituality of anyone else. Now, I don't happen to believe that, and I certainly wasn't going to go there. And so I...
And I was not that reporter.
No, it definitely was not you. I think I was to be one of his first interviews, and he was a great guy, absolutely great guy. And I found myself telling some stories and about women and about people of color and about the immigrant experience. And I said to him, you know, whatever it is in our story, if you're a straight white man, if you're a person of color, if you're gay or lesbian, if you're a woman, if you're an immigrant, there is something that profoundly helps to shape your experience of life. And I said, you have a choice, essentially. Your experience can serve to cut you off from other people, or you can see in your experiences the unfolding of empathy and compassion for other people, because out of your experiences, you're led to understand and imagine what it's like to walk in the shoes of somebody else. And I said, so you're able to learn from the wisdom, from the spirituality, from the life experiences of other people. So instead of imagining that anyone is better than anyone else, how about thinking of this as really a fabulous doorway to celebrating something of your oneness and our interconnectedness as human beings. And I think that that's ultimately the invitation of life to all of us.
Are you still in the church?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I tend to spend time in Seattle, in our home here, and in Eastern Washington, in a very rural community. And so when I'm not on the road speaking and lecturing and doing workshops and so on, I spend time at this wonderful congregation in Eastern Washington, and it's fun to sit in the pew and listen to the minister who's there, who's a great preacher, to listen to her and to take notes and be fed by that. And of course, you know, I'm not just speaking at universities and conferences. I also do work in churches too, and it's always fun to do that. But it is not. I'm not paid by the religious institution, and really love this new season in my life.
The Episcopal Church is struggling with the issue of gays in the church, in the clergy, in higher levels of the clergy. Is that disturbing for you? Because it seems like in many ways there was an enlightened attitude they had, but not so much anymore. Or at least they're struggling there.
Well, I think we're living in a period where many institutions are struggling with this new emergent time in human history, when we have new ways of organizing, of communicating, of learning, and those happen through many wonderful social media tools,
right.
And of course the internet. And so what that does essentially is it undercuts the power, the authority, the ability of institutions to, and this is true of political and religious and academic institutions, to exert control and power.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing many institutions almost going through a last gasp of the old order as they try to enforce orthodoxy, whatever that might mean for their particular institution. Part of what I find so encouraging is that when I talk to people who are under the age of 35, the issues of gender and human sexuality and race, they view them as old people's issues. And that makes me feel very ancient. But I say
Me
that.
too, I'm right with you.
But you know, the work that so many of us have done around you know, the moral arc of inclusion of all people. You know, when I hear under 35-year-olds talk about and see the rich variety of their friendships, I'm just filled with hope for where we're headed. And when I start to put that together with these new ways of communicating and organizing and learning, I just have a lot of optimism about an emergent new consciousness of how to be human in the world, which is in part, you know, one of the reasons that I've written the book.
Have you gone back to South Africa recently?
Yes, I was there actually last fall to take part in the birthday festivities for Desmond Tutu's 80th birthday, and what a 3-day celebration that was.
But what's the country like for you now, and particularly as it finally started to change?
Well, you know, I've been going back every year since Mandela was released, which was, I hope I'm getting this right, 1990. And it was possible for exiles to go back, and political parties were unbanned and able to function and so on. And what I've noticed is the slow but constant building of civic institutions and a building of a civil society that had not existed before. All children in South Africa have access to education now. All people have access to medical care. The wounds and the scars of the apartheid decades are still there. There is still inequality. You can see the lingering effects of apartheid that will be there for probably decades. But there is, for the most part, a spirit of optimism about the future. Now, having said that, there are also some disturbing things at work. Desmond Tutu's great buddy, the Dalai Lama, was to come and take part in the birthday festivities last October, and he was going to give a lecture on compassion and peace and love, and it was going to be the sort of showcase central event of Tutu's birthday celebrations. And the South African government essentially refused to give him a visa. And they only made that decision about 3 days before. And then, of course, they said, oh, we're so sorry that His Holiness decided not to come. Well, you know, that is just so transparent. And Tutu was furious. I mean, I haven't seen him that angry in a long time. And he held a news conference at which he was wagging a finger, and he said, you, as the government, are no better than the old government that we prayed for the downfall of. And he said, you are, I mean, they weren't just preventing two elderly men getting together to celebrate a birthday. They were getting at the heart of freedom of association and freedom of speech. That's the issue that was going on. And Tutu says, as we prayed for the downfall of the old regime, we will pray for your downfall as well. Whoa. And I thought, boy, those are fighting words.
Yes.
And then, of course, at one of the events, the deputy president was there, and Tutu embraced him, and he said, I didn't mean your personal downfall, but I mean, what he was doing was, and I went to one of the protest gatherings outside the South African Houses of Parliament, and it felt like being back in the old days, except what was different was that the majority of people there were people of color, and they were young. Most of them were under the age of 40, and they were standing up for freedom of expression and freedom of association. And so, you know, there are these struggles going on in a newly emergent democracy. But you know, 6 or 8 years ago, we arrived one day and turned on the radio as we drove to my parents' house, and they interrupted the program and said, the South African Supreme Court has just issued a ruling. They've directed the Parliament to legalize same-gender marriage within 12 months. We just about, you know, drove the car off the road. It was like, what? This in South Africa? So it's a place of mixed messages, but primarily a place of hope and, of course, incredible beauty.
But isn't that the world today?
Yes, yes, it is. And I think, Enrique, the question is, so what do each one of us do with all of that? Because I believe passionately, and the message of the book is that our voice and our role and our story not only help us connect to one another, but we are part of the emerging new story of what it means to be human, and every single voice, every single action of ours is needed.
The book is called A New Way to Be Human, 7 Spiritual Pathways to Becoming Fully Alive. The author is Robert V. Taylor, and thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks.